Welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast exploring what it really takes to lead responsibly in today's business world. I'm Charlie Martin, your host, founder of TrueMark and the Anti-Greenwash Charter. And our article this week is Reuters' Digging to Zero, Inside the Race to Decarbonize Mining, published in May 2025, which lays bare the brutal arithmetic of trying to clean up an industry that provides the metals that the green transition depends on, but is itself carbon heavy to its core. And I'm delighted to say that our guest today to unpack all of this is Emma Scott, Vice President of Sustainability at Kent. Emma, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show this morning. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Now, Emma, we have had a few technical issues that nobody else will be aware of listening and viewing into this. So I'm fingers crossed that we're going to be able to get through the conversation nicely. But I've obviously very briefly introduced your role and mentioned Kent. Can you give our listeners and viewers that aren't aware of the organization and perhaps the role that sustainability is playing a little bit more meat on the bone?
Yeah. So I've actually been in this role now for 3 years. Kent is an organisation, has a long history, over 100-year history from when it was originally founded in Ireland. It's gone through different stages and then 4 years ago it became Kent as we know it now through a number of different acquisitions. The business at that point in time, spent a lot of time looking at what type of organisation it wanted to be, particularly around, its purpose as an organisation and the culture of the organisation. And one thing they felt they were missing was a sustainability strategy and as someone to lead sustainability. And that's where the conversations with myself and obviously other candidates kind of started. And I joined Kent, like I say, 3 years ago to head up that new role of Vice President of Sustainability. And at that point in time, we started to establish a sustainability council within the organisation that's made up of key stakeholders, both operationally and functionally from around the business, who then lead and deliver on sustainability around the organisation. So, at that point in time, the business had lots of good intent. There was lots of good pockets of things going on all around the world, but there was no strategic direction. Everything was just kind of done in isolation and off people's own back rather than as a strategic program. So we spent a lot of time looking at actually what the material items were for us and what was the right things for us to drive forward. We work in an industry where our peers had been at sustainability for quite a long period of time at that point. So we knew we were behind the curve a bit. And so we were really conscious of that and actually being trying to catch up on the journey and try and move forward past where our peers were as well. So we were quite aggressive in what we were trying to achieve, but we wanted to make sure that we were going about it in the right way as well, and that we weren't, coming out making statements that weren't true. We wanted to be very honest in our journey, and that's something that we've pushed from the beginning, is that transparency will be at the absolute heart of everything that we do within Kent, and it goes with our culture as an organisation anyway. So Kent and me feel like a really good fit. As I say, I've been here 3 years now and I absolutely love it.
A brilliant introduction, Emma, and I love it. In that introduction, you've actually kind of addressed perhaps some of my, I guess, slight elephant in the room kind of questions around like the organization and obviously the history of it, and the fact that you've acknowledged that, this is the beginning of a journey, and that, it's a relatively new journey. You're bold and ambitious, but you want to be transparent and clear about where you are and the improvements that have been made. But I want to ask you, you've got a fairly unique experience because you're coming into a large organization that is essentially, I'm going to use incorrect terminology here, but almost a bit of a blank check, an open script for you to sort of set the direction, if you like. What's that been like for you kind of personally to have that degree of potential power, if you like, in terms of the impact that you can have within the organization?
It's been exciting but scary at the same time. And previous roles in other organisations, I've never kind of had, like you say, that blank slate. There's always been something going on or somebody that's kind of directing the journey. And one of the first things the CEO said to me was, I trust you. Go and do what you need to do. And that felt so empowering. I never kind of had that conversation before with anyone in such a senior position. And so for me, I found it really freeing actually, because rather than trying to dance to somebody else's tune, I was actually looking at things, taking a step back, and we were doing it as a collective, as a council. So we were able to make sure that everybody's voice around the business was heard and find something that really worked for Kent as an organization, rather than trying to make something fit within the business. But I'm not going to lie, it was quite scary at the same time, having that pressure on your shoulders.
I love it. I love it. Let me ask you, I'm fascinated. You've alluded to other roles that you've had where you maybe didn't have quite the same blank slate. But I want to ask you a question a little bit more about like your origin story, if you like. But I want to ask something in particular. Like, can you name or recall kind of one experience, perhaps professionally or personally, that really helped sort of shape your sense of kind of ethics at work, and what ethics should look like? Can you recall that for us?
I think it's going to sound really corny, but very true. A big shift in mindset for me was when I became a parent. And so you always think about other people, you know, and things going on around the world and stuff. But suddenly when you become a parent, things become kind of real, and you start to understand actually the impact that things have on something that you love and care about. And I've always had a passion for the environment, around climate change, you know, and you know, people as well, and the impact that we have on the world. But when I became a parent, it also became about the impact in their future as well, and what kind of life they potentially could have, or their children could have. And it kind of started to resonate even more with me about, you know, this isn't just about today. It's about all those future generations and that legacy that we leave behind. And I want to make sure I'm on the right side of that fence of trying to create change and trying to create that positive step forward.
And out of interest, Emma, were you working in sustainability before you became a mother, or was it aligned with becoming a mother that you went into sustainability?
My background is environmental. That's kind of where my qualifications are. I've done a geography degree and then a master's in environmental management. And so my first role was an environmental advisor. And then sustainability program in the organization that I was working in started by looking at carbon reporting. And so because I was environmental, it kind of naturally fell to myself to complete that. And then as that organization's sustainability program started to open up to be more truly sustainability, and started to look, you know, at inclusion, you know, and diversity, you know, charitable giving, community engagement, etc., that then also started to come to me because I'd taken on the carbon. And that was something that I was really happy about, because, as I say, it was something that I've always had an interest in. I mentioned I did geography at university. And at the time, geography was probably the closest thing you could get to a sustainability degree. We'd done a module on sustainable development. You know, we'd done modules on gender divisions at work, for example, things people don't expect you would do in geography. It's not all about looking at a map.
Or colouring in.
Exactly, yeah. So that really sparked an interest in me, and I'd always loved geography from school. I had a fantastic teacher that really instilled a passion in me. And so I always had that drive to work in sustainability. So I was really happy when that opportunity opened up and grabbed it with both hands.
It's fascinating. So yeah, you can understand this, you know, young Emma being inspired and driven by all things environmental and as you say, the sort of geography sort of lens, if you like. And then it was as a mother that the really kind of ethical, moral impact of your work and the possibility of being on I like that for, you know, the right side of things, a sense that became really important to you. I'm going to play one more kind of devil's advocate question for you. That feel free to give me a very strong forward defensive if you'd rather not answer this one directly. But so I, you know, there are going to be, you know, people listening to this show that are going to be sat there, you know, the almost the sort of, you know, the environmental evangelists, if you like, who are going to see this and go, Kent is a company that I and again, I might be getting my things misunderstood here, but you know, a majority of operation does involve working with, you know, oil and gas related clients and customers, etc. When you get, if you get any question marks around the role of sustainability within a company like Kent that is still relying on, you know, that kind of work and those kind of clients, what's your response to them?
So for me, I personally would rather be on the inside of one of those organizations trying to create change and trying to do things better than on the outside, throwing stones. I mean, we obviously need people to be questioning what organizations are doing. It's absolutely right that that happens. And, you know, we wouldn't have probably my type of role if that wasn't the case. But for me, I want to feel like I'm part of the solution. And so, you know, I mentioned I felt, you know, Kent was a right fit for me personally, as well as because as an organization, it's very clear as well around where it stands. So we want to be part of the energy transition, and, you know, low carbon renewables is a huge proportion of what we want to be working in. We have very ambitious targets around low carbon renewable growth and work in non-fossil fuel related sectors. However, we're also realistic. And we know that the lights need to be kept on. The hospitals still need to operate. Everybody still needs to get work. So we know that right now, oil and gas is still absolutely imperative to the mix to deliver what people need on a day-to-day basis. And so for us, we choose both. We choose to work in both areas. But in the oil and gas work that we do, we try to choose to do it better. So as part of our purpose, we say in the most responsible way ever imagined. And that's where our sustainability work comes in, our sustainability strategy of trying to make that really come to life for our clients and having a positive impact in those projects that would be undertaken anyway.
I love the fact that you've responded to that question in that way. I think like the pragmatic, optimistic realism, if you like, of what you've just described, I think is brilliant. And actually really focusing on something that I don't think gets a lot of airtime, certainly in conversations that I've had on the show, that actually, you know, oil and gas, fossil fuel related activity is a requirement for, you know, the status quo of the way that we've become accustomed to the world working to work. How can we make that better? You know, that's almost something that doesn't even get sort of brought into question. I think also there's a really nice commonality in what you've just described with actually the core element, I think, of this week's article that we're going to be discussing in terms of the role of mining in the green transition. But I'm going to allow you, Emma, if possible now, to provide our listeners and viewers with just a brief overview of what's in the article. And then I just want you to pick out from the piece actually something a little different to what we sometimes ask people to do. I want you to pick out, if possible, one point within the article that you think people would find hardest to accept in terms of their normal view of the world.
Yeah, so the article that we're going to be looking at today is Digging to Zero Inside the Race to Decarbonise Mining, and that's coming from Ethical Corporation magazine. So the article is looking at the mining industry in general and the impact that it is having on climate change and the sheer amount of emissions that are coming from that industry. But what it does do is focus in on one organisation in particular in Australia called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, so hopefully I am, Fortescue, who are seen as being leading the way in trying to achieve real emissions reduction. That seems to be being driven by their CEO. And one thing you asked me was to pick out something in there that people might not quite like or be a bit shocked with someone. And actually something he says in the article is that the word net in net zero is killing us. And that journey. And that's something that really resonates with me, because what this organisation have chose to do is, instead of going out there and buying a ton of offsets and trying to claim to be net zero, they are going out there and trying to really make a change and really cut emissions, which is what we all need to be striving for. So this organisation has invested billions in this journey, and they've got some really stringent targets. They want to be net zero by 2030. So, you know, not too far in the distant future. And they're investing in some really cool technology from the mining trucks, those massive vehicles that we see, investing billions in working with their suppliers to change those and bring in electrification and other technologies, to investing in renewable power on site. So looking at solar and turbines along with battery storage to move away from diesel generation and move to renewable storage. So for me, that's something that really resonates, because that's something similar to what we're trying to do as an organisation. So we identified generators were the biggest source of our emissions globally. And so we've been looking at technology in the same way. We've implemented one project on our highest emitting site so far, which is a solar array. And we're just in the process now of ordering some mobile versions of that technology for out in the middle of nowhere, where we don't have the fixed installations on sites that move around. And it's basically, we're looking at basically a containerized version where a big fan of solar panels are pulled out of the back of a truck, along with battery technology, and it then will replace diesel generators on our remote sites. So we're looking at actually piloting a couple of those in the next few months, hopefully, to try and reduce that diesel generation. So this, for me, is something that really hits home. Net zero as a concept is fantastic, but we all know people try and find shortcuts around these things, and not everybody uses the term in the right way. I feel like this organization is absolutely going about it in the right way. They are following the science. They are doing what they can. They are investing heavily and making all the correct changes, rather than just going to buy a solution elsewhere that actually really isn't making a huge impact from an emissions perspective.
Emma, I need to invite you on all shows, and you can do the introduction to every article. That was absolutely brilliant. And you've done many things. You've answered my direct question. You've provided a really interesting summary and pulled out some interesting points. I've got so many different areas I could go, but one thing I want to ask you, just to explain for our listeners and viewers, when you brilliantly described like some of the confusion and perhaps some of the misdirection that occurs as a result of the focus on net zero, can you just explain to us what the real zero concept actually like refers to and what it means, perhaps in context of the mining company that you've just described?
Yeah, so it's just an absolute emissions reduction. So it's striving to get to zero emissions from operations. So this company is focused on scope 1, scope 2. So there's no mention of scope 3 there, which obviously is a bit more difficult. But from a scope 1, scope 2 perspective, this is not looking to offset emissions to be able to achieve that net zero badge. This is actually striving really for zero emissions and really working to reduce scope 1 and scope 2 wherever they can across our operations.
Brilliantly described, and thank you for introducing it. Immediately seems like the very realistic way of viewing emissions when we're looking at sort of traditionally heavy emitting sectors and actually wanting something to happen, like a shifting of the dial, which I guess is what we're all in this for. Let me ask you, in terms of when you came in at Kent, 4 years ago, and you were sort of given this sort of blank sheet, was it from a emissions perspective, were you sort of looking at, well, what are my low hanging fruit? What are my biggest impact opportunities? And that's what you began to focus your attention and your mind on? Or was it sort of about looking at the full spectrum of operations immediately and determining what could be done in every area? How did you approach things?
So when I joined, at that point, we hadn't even established our scope 1, scope 2 baseline.
Right.
So we had no insights really into what our emissions portfolio looked like. We had an indication, obviously, from the type of work we undertake, but we didn't really know where the main sources were coming from or how much there was. So we spent an amount of time gathering that information globally from around our business. And we also invested in carbon accounting software to help us to trend and analyze that data. So we went on an implementation project to implement that software. And then we created our baseline emissions data set, which kind of showed what we thought was going to be the case, but proved that it definitely was. But what it also did was pinpoint actually the locations where that was a significant issue for us. And so we identified a particular project in the Middle East, which was our highest emitting site by a big way, and deliberately targeted that project as a starting point. And then within that region, which was the highest source for our emissions, and starting to share the learning from that project and the things that have gone well, things not got so well, and try and increase that level of best practice within that region. At the same time, sharing that through our sustainability council to the rest of the business and encouraging them to go and take action within their business as well. But we're only a small team. At the end of the day, there's 2 of us in our sustainability team centrally. So at the same time, we can't do everything. You'd love to see that. And there's a million and one things you want to get after, but you can't boil the ocean. You have to pick one thing at a time to tackle. And so we wanted to tackle the biggest beast, as we saw it, within our emissions data set, and go from there.
Fascinating. I want to come back and talk about the future of Kent from a sustainability perspective, because I think you've just picked up on a really interesting point regarding the sort of resource that's available, etc. But I want to dip slightly back into the article. Sorry, we're jumping around a little bit here. I want to jump back into the article a little bit. One of the I think the key like first bullet point that's in the piece is talking about the fact that the mining industry, I think, contributes, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, 6 to 7% of global emissions. 4 to 7.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. 4 to 7% of global emissions, and yet what we are mining for in terms of the cobalts, the lithiums, etc., are literally the building blocks of the technology that we want to build in order to address the environmental issues at play. When you read that, and I think from what you've described in terms of the pragmatic view of your work that you do at Kent, like what's your take on that? Like, how do you think that? What does that make you feel and think when you read something like that?
So the pragmatic side of me thinks we need to have it. We need those elements for the energy transition. You know, that's the way that our technology is right now. There's no other way around that if that's where we need to get to. You know, there's then also that environmentalist in me in the background that says, you know, it's you know, a significant contributor to greenhouse gases. We know there's a lot of other environmental impacts from mining as well. But if I put on my role and my pragmatic head, for me, what this organization is doing is exactly the right thing. And it goes back to what I said about our purpose. It's about doing it in a better, more responsible way. We know we need these elements. That's not going to go away. We need to do it better. And that's exactly what this organization is trying to deliver.
And I think you've nailed that. And I think it comes back to your point before about, look, these activities are necessary right now. Yeah. If we are literally talking about technologies which might ultimately make those operations obsolete, great. Yeah. But ultimately, we need the material delivered from it in order to create that outcome. So you can't have your cake and eat it, essentially. It would be my response to the naysayers, if you like, in terms of, oh, we should just, do away with traditional mining immediately. Is that a fair synopsis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'd all love, like, overnight someone to, come up with some new innovation that's going to get rid of all of these environmental problems. But we know that's not going to happen. So we need to be realistic about where we are right now and make changes to be more responsible. At the end of the day, we know there's organizations out there that won't care about the environmental impact. In all honesty, we know there's organizations like that. But we need to be pressuring those organizations to be making change and look to these type of organizations and that we've been talking about to actually follow in their footsteps. So I'm sure within the mining sector, there's plenty of organizations right now who still aren't really looking at their emissions portfolio and just, continuing operations as they always have. But it's on us now to put the pressure on those organizations to follow suit and to start to make some real change there as well.
Yes, indeed. Hear, hear. You're going to get your first hear, hear of the show. Let me ask you this. You've kind of touched on it again when you were talking about, like, the way that Kent has gone about, or the comfort that you felt in joining Kent, knowing that the way that you were going to communicate about where you were on your journey and what you were ultimately trying to achieve was what made you feel comfortable, because you felt like, well, as long as we can be honest about and transparent about where we are and about the difficulties that are at play, etc., then it's that kind of liberates you in many ways to be able to speak confidently about those things that you are doing well and the investments that you're making. Just applying that to your understanding of kind of your sector, is that unique to Kent, do you think? Or do you think generally other players in your sector are adopting that approach to communicating about their, and I'm going to use a really broad term, sustainability credentials?
I think it's getting better within our sector. I think it's getting more transparent, and I think changes in regulations are helping to enforce that as well. But, it's not too long ago, you could look at some of our peers' websites and it would look more like an agricultural website because it was all lovely, pretty fields and things. And actually nothing really to do with what they did, but it made it look much more environmentally friendly. Whereas that's, something we've absolutely tried to stay clear of. And, something that we would hate to ever be accused of would be to be greenwashing. That's something that we've done. Everything we've done is try to be the opposite of that. And I think, the pressure coming from our clients as well, of the type of questions that were being asked by our clients typically have a lot of pressure on their shoulders and a lot of people watching what they're doing. So that naturally flows down to our sector as well. Which means coming through in our tenders and the conversations we have with our clients are much more stringent questions. You can't get away anymore with hiding behind the fluffy, nice words. They want to know the detail of what's actually going on within your program. They've got past that, that nice fluffy exterior of a sustainability program and down in the nitty gritty.
And that's very good to hear. And I want to ask you one more question on the comms side, because obviously it's our wheelhouse, and I am particularly interested in how organizations like Kent kind of manage this. But what's your sort of dynamic and relationship like with the kind of comms and marketing function within Kent? Like, how does it work between you and them in terms of, the messages that they're able to adopt and to use in their campaigns? Like, how does that work?
So I have a really close relationship with our VP of communications and advocacy anyway. We both sit in the leadership team, and what we call the hub is our leadership team. So we have a close relationship anyway and work very closely. But we have a member of that team that sits within our sustainability council. So they are aware of everything that is going on around the business, and we develop a communications plan together. So everything that we do is in unison. There's nothing that kind of goes on without one end of the team knowing everybody's involved.
Very good. Very good to hear. I think there's that. As soon as you have, one of the things that we come up against a lot is like the need for those two functions to have a way of being able to find a common language and a way of communicating with each other that kind of, again, creates that kind of literacy between, two really important functions in order to get the kind of responsible comms piece right. One more question for you, Emma, and I know we've only really briefly touched upon some themes from the article, but I think we've picked out some really interesting ones. When you think about like the future of sustainability for Kent, like what are your like top priorities? What are your like significant areas for improvement that you're like, this is what I want to see happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
So I think number one is probably education and awareness around the business, getting the business to truly understand what sustainability means and the benefits to the business of sustainability. Everything I'm trying to do is to embed sustainability within the organization rather than having sustainability as a bolt-on. So if we can educate and make people aware of those benefits of sustainability, they will naturally start to do that themselves rather than me coming along and telling them they have to do something. So that's where I want to get to, that it's just part of the mindset within the organization, that just people just think about sustainability, that every day-to-day roles and decisions that they're making. From a targets perspective, emissions is obviously a big one for us. But we also really want to be seen as a leader from an inclusiveness perspective. We want to be the place where everybody comes and just feels free to be themselves, and have a real sense of belonging within the organization. And our culture is all built around that. Our employees are our most important asset. So for us, the well-being and the health and safety of our employees is also really important. So we rolled out a well-being program, which has been embedded around the business through different local teams, to help not just the physical well-being, but the mental, the financial well-being, everything, the whole kind of picture of well-being for our people. And also, we're very aware of the communities in which we operate. Lifting those communities and being part of those communities is really important to us. So, we work a lot to develop training programs, look to increase our localization rates where possible, work with local suppliers, etc. So that's something that we're always striving to improve, and something that's going to be a real focus for us in the coming years.
Brilliant. It's really interesting, your first point about embedding sustainability within an organization. And again, this is something that comes up a lot. I recall conversations that I had yonks ago on the Responsible Edge with, in fact, with one chap in particular. I'll name drop him, Dax Lovegrove, who was the previous head of sustainability at Jimmy Choo and Versace and lots of other places that I was like, wow, you know, he's a smart chap. You can imagine he was just dressed very well on the show. And Dax was saying to me that he pretty much worked to kind of a 3-year remit. He very much viewed it as within 3 years, I should be able to come into an organization, embed sustainability in the way that it needs to be, and then almost sort of exit stage left, if you like, and allow for that natural sort of development of sustainability within an organization to go on. I kind of agree. I do agree with that. I think my observation is that, yes, that's ultimately the outcome. But you do need to obviously invest the required kind of energy, effort up front in order to allow that to happen. And that can be quite a significant investment. Do you, when you think about these kind of ambitions that you've got at Kent, is there a hope for you that perhaps, you know, some more resource might be coming your way to allow this to become a reality? Or do you think that you've got the resource that you need in order to realize those goals?
I think more resource, a small amount of resource centrally is going to be needed. And actually, we've just got sign off for a report and lead position. Because of all the disclosures that we have to make, etc. We want to be best practice in all the disclosures that we do and increase our scorings and things like CDP, EcoVadis, etc. So that role is going to add real value for us. But we want to keep that central team as small as possible. We really want it to be out there and embedded within the business. Where we want to get to is that central team is doing all those disclosures, the annual things, the tenders, that type of stuff. But actually, it's actually driven out there in the operations and in the functions of the business. Ultimately, I kind of want to do myself out of a job. That's where I want to get to. I want to get to the point where they don't really need my direction. I'm just there to kind of tell everybody about it.
And I imagine that your Sustainability Council has been created in such a way that plays a really core central role in terms of distributing influence, resources, energy, if you like, throughout the organization from that central team. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. So the members of that team, you know, they're responsible for taking what we do centrally and disseminating that within their business. And we are quite loose with what we ask them to do, but deliberately so, because we know that it's not a one size fits all approach. Our business is very diverse. In the geographies we work in is very diverse as well. So something that works for one part of the business in one region is not going to be the same material issues that are going to be in another part of the business. And so for us, it's about attacking, as I said before, those big things that are actually going to really make an impact and be meaningful. What I would hate is for somebody in our business to be really driving for something that actually nobody locally really cares about, because part of the journey is bringing everybody on that journey with you. And that's the only way you're going to be successful. So you need to tap into the stuff that people feel passionate about in those areas.
Here. The last thing you want is a tone deaf sustainability initiative that costs oodles amounts of money and has a very shiny comms exterior, but ultimately lands flat on its face. Couldn't agree more. You're going to get the ultimate here of the show ever. Let's conclude now. I'm fascinated to see what you're going to do with the magic wand. Emma, if I were to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
So you probably could predict from kind of the conversation we've had what I would say, but real, true transparency for me. Almost give all the corporations around the world some truth serum and make them really talk about what they do as an organization on two fronts. So first of all, what are the real impacts of the products or services that they make? You know, people consume stuff, you know, organizations buy things, and the nature of sustainability is there's not an impact right there that second that they can see. It's not like health and safety where someone's hurt in front of them and you can see that blood or broken bone or whatever. And so people find it really hard to understand or visualize what those impacts are. And I think we need to be more honest about that as organizations and, you know, hold on to that truth and then talk about actually what you're doing to make that better, to reduce those impacts. And also about that, being transparent about that journey. We know everything's not perfect. We have to be realistic about stuff. Some things will work, some things won't. And we have to be honest about that. If you look at sustainability reports, everything is rosy. And we know because of the world we live in that it's not the case. And if it was a true reflection, the world would be very different to what we actually see in reality. So for me, I want to get to the point where actually a sustainability report is a factual document that really reflects where a business is, good and bad.
Here. I mean, the ultimate I could possibly give. I mean, it aligns exactly with all the work that we're doing. So I couldn't agree with you more, Emma. While you were describing that, I mean, the term "let's get real" just came into mind when you were describing this. Like, you know, let's just stop confusing the matters, if you like, and let's just get real with each other. And I think that actually is another interesting point. We often talk about transparency, and I suppose it goes hand in hand with it. But I'm starting to talk to more and more people about accessibility. Like, we have created, and as you well know, this word soup associated with sustainability, which in many ways, one of the outcomes, it creates a degree of barrier to understanding and engagement when it comes to the sustainability credentials of organizations. So I think it's one thing about being transparent, but I'm actually calling on organizations to make their sustainability credentials more accessible, easier to understand. That I think would be another huge impact if we could.
Absolutely. The amount of jargon is unreal that you have to navigate through. Yeah. Even just, you know, simple things like sustainability and ESG being totally taken as the same thing, which they clearly are not. But people talk about it in the same way, and it confuses people about actually what it really means. And, you know, part of the battle I still have now is people thinking that sustainability just means environmental kind of tree hugging fluffiness. And that goes back to my piece before about that education and awareness, why I think it's so important. But absolutely cutting the jargon, just being clear, honest and simple, I think is the best way forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think like it's almost like it's a slightly sort of dangerous sort of offset of or subcategory, if you like, of greenwashing. I think like this whole, actually what we've put into this is substantiated in a certain way and the language is appropriate and the context is considered, but it's so incredibly confusing to actually understand what it really means that it kind of is greenwashing in of itself, because it doesn't provide clarity to the reader, to the customer, to the stakeholder to understand what's going on. Emma, that was a brilliant whistle-stop tour. Thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and giving up some of your time.
No problem. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having us, Charlie.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to my guest, Emma Scott, for translating the high-stakes drama of mining's decarbonisation into a grounded perspective on what it really takes to move giants towards change. As a reminder, this episode is brought to you by TrueMark, the independent mark of integrity for sustainability reporting. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.